Enshrouded may legitimately be the best survival game that I have ever played. So first off, yeah, you could see it, this video is sponsored by Enshrouded. But this one's actually a bit unique because I volunteered to do this sponsored video. I legitimately think quite a few of you are going to be very interested in Enshrouded, especially if you're already a fan of Fallout or the Elder Scrolls. So first glance, Enshrouded probably looks like just one of those familiar survival games, but this one's just better. It almost feels like the developers played all of those other games out there and just made an improved one. You'll have the vast open world with tons of crafting, skills, and light classes to build into, some incredibly in-depth base building, and of course, a ton to find while exploring. But then it also has a bunch of unique quirks that just make it a lot more interesting, like mining directly into that room of the final boss, because yeah, this is a voxel-based world, and you could actually do that here. Some of the quests and environmental storytelling were surprisingly impactful and really drew me in. And oh yeah, like I mentioned, if you enjoy building games, you could do some pretty insane things in Enshrouded. Enshrouded will begin in that familiar way. You start off with just the clothes on your back and are thrust into a beautiful open world where you can kind of just do whatever you want. There's some early game quests to help direct you and some very helpful tutorials. I feel like quite a few survival games fall short on this front, but with Enshrouded, I never was really all that confused. The tutorials are right in the world and do a really good job at guiding you along the way. But of course, the first task here is just going to be to survive. Enshrouded is not a hardcore survival game. Like, yeah, enemies and sometimes even the environment can kill you, especially if you're bad, but the vast majority of the time you'll encounter that as you're seeking out that type of content. And early on, there won't be too many threats to you. You'll harvest some of those early game resources, gradually build up your first home, which genuinely does feel like quite the accomplishment once you actually finish it. And here is one of my favorite mechanics of Enshrouded comes into play. So in this game, basically everything you do will cost stamina. You'll use it to sprint, to swing a tool or a weapon, and even using other things like a glider or jumping all will cost stamina. But the way this is balanced is the more survival things you have or do, the larger the bonus you'll get to your stamina. So here in my fully enclosed home with a fire going and some decent furniture around, I get a flat stamina bonus for a certain amount of time. And this will scale. So if I build even more furniture or higher quality furniture, I could extend this and enhance the stamina bonus even further. And similarly, having a balanced diet is important here as well. You could find and cook up food, and these will each occupy one of your various food slots. So it's kind of hilarious because it basically gets you playing house in the most organic way possible. You'll have your meat, vegetable, and water while sitting by the fire, and this is the best way to prepare for that upcoming adventure. And to me, this was just kind of cool. They managed to make a game where building a warm, comfy home and having a relatively balanced diet is something you'll organically do because you do want those incredibly powerful bonuses. But of course, quickly thereafter, you're going to want some better gear for your character, and this too is done in a pretty cool way. Higher tier crafting in Enshrouded is mostly going to be locked behind craftspeople. These are going to be NPCs that are locked in various locations around the world where you basically have to go and save these NPCs, and then you can place them back at your house or base, along with some of their newly unlocked crafting tables. But this too creates a flexible and nicely organic gameplay loop. You want better items, so you have to go explore to get them. And exploring may just be the single best part of Enshrouded overall. The realm of Embervale is vast. Enshrouded has several different biomes, and it is a gigantic open world, but some of these areas are going to be a bit different. The Shroud will be this more dangerous, gaseous area. You'll find these all over the world, and in the lore, the Shroud destroyed much of society. But in gameplay terms, this is a pretty fun mechanic. Whenever you're enshrouded, a countdown timer will begin. So you're only able to spend a limited amount of time in the Shroud. And it creates this natural tension that forms as you're doing a quest or some kind of objective in the Shroud. So like at one point, I was approaching a boss fight, but I noticed my timer was very rapidly counting down, and this immediately ups the tension with everything you're doing. But of course, this is an open world action RPG, so if you prepare better, there are several potions you can use or take to increase your time here, or alternatively, if you explore around, you'll be able to find various items or activatables that will allow you to increase your time in the Shroud. But I did start to notice the Shroud took a lot of things that otherwise would have been relatively mundane or forgettable as a part of this game, and it just made them a lot more fun and interesting because there was that tension there. Relatively free because you could just walk out of the Shroud whenever you want to be safe again, but it really is a nice X factor around exploration that consistently comes into play. Because beyond that, what truly makes exploration so special is just how much there is to find and how many ways you have to go about finding it. Enshrouded is absolutely one of those games where you'll leave the base to take on that one singular quest, but then return several hours later having done a bunch of other things that aren't even the quest you left to do. There are a ton of objectives on this map. Definitely not to an overwhelming degree, but to a healthy degree. There'll be always something else for you to do if you want to. You'll encounter all kinds of different dungeons with spooky and scary creatures within, oftentimes holding treasure or something of note. There are quite a few individualized stories all over this map for you to find. You'll find a lot of these notes all over, and sometimes this will just lead into a full-on boss fight with unique mechanics tied to that boss. This game has several boss fights all around the map, but conversely, you might just be doing dungeon diving, looking for valuables as a part of a specific quest. And one nice aspect of this is it is a destroyed world, so oftentimes you'll find enemy encampments that you can loot and have some of these newfound enemies within, but oftentimes even more interesting, you could find full-fledged destroyed cities, or even just build on top of those destroyed cities. Enshrouded has some of the best environmental storytelling I've seen in a game since Fallout 4. You'll walk into one of these destroyed cities and find a couple of pages or notes, and as you get deeper and deeper, you'll get more and more of this story and be able to visibly see what actually happened to these people, or really the aftermath of whatever happened here. And a nice touch of this is many of these notes will have clues around certain valuables that are nearby or notable things that you can find. And sometimes they're just really sad. They'll suck you in for all of the wrong reasons because you're listening to a story about a bunch of people that have now perished. But what is perhaps my favorite aspect of all of this is how dynamic you can make exploration relatively freely. Early on, you'll get two major items that just make things a lot more fun. You'll get a glider as well as a grappling hook. You're going to spend a lot of time exploring and traversing, and these make things not only more interesting, but also a lot easier. But you'll likely get some other tools that are surprisingly handy during exploration, like the pickaxe. Enshrouded is a voxel-based world, so many environmental things are destroyable by you with the right tool. At one point, I noticed the quest marker directly ahead of me, so I just took out my pickaxe and tried mining my way in, and wouldn't you know, that worked. Other times, I used my glider to just land directly on top of the enemy location as a nice shortcut, and nearly all of the objectives in this game are left wide open for you as a player. You're able to use whatever means necessary to beat that quest, and it definitely feels like Enshrouded is one of those games where, as you try alternative means to do something, you're rewarded for it, or you just end up having a ton of fun in the process. At one point while I was playing, I unlocked the new blacksmith that was placing down some of my new crafting benches, and I had a bit of an incident with my home. But I used this as an opportunity. I turned lemons into lemonades and dug out a full-fledged basement to my home for all of the new crafting apparatus. This voxel-based building system is incredibly powerful, with a ton of possibilities available. You've likely seen some of the crazy builds online, and these are definitely doable, especially considering Enshrouded has a full-fledged 16-player co-op mode if you're into that. I didn't mess around with it too much, I pretty much exclusively played solo, but it's definitely there, and it definitely seems like it could be a lot of fun. And one of the other things that really sets this game apart is, as you're playing, it feels like the devs have actually played their game and made changes as a result. There are quite a few just really nice quality of life features. You can equip and use a ranged weapon in the typical style, or alternatively just assign it to the ranged weapon slot, and then at any point by holding down the Q key, you can use your ranged weapon. This is super dynamic, so right in the middle of combat, you can switch to a ranged weapon to try and get a few cheeky shots off, then switch immediately back to melee. The quick use bar has an entire alternative quick use bar that you could switch to on the fly, so oftentimes I would have one focused on combat, and then a second one more focused on eating and building. But as a backbone to all of this, Enshrouded also has a full-on skill system with loose classes that you're able to build towards. A lot of the abilities you unlock are genuine game changers. There are a ton of new combat abilities that you've likely been seeing throughout this video, but also just things like a double jump, which opens up a whole world of verticality. How you spec out your character is completely freeform and up to you though. So you could build a little bit into one class or another, you could rely on some of the survival or building abilities, or just completely focus into combat. And speaking of combat, this too has a surprising amount of depth for this game. There's going to be a variety of melee weapons, there's going to be mechanics like rolling or dodges here, there's also a block and repost system. Magic is a component of this game, and there are several different methods for using magic, and of course other ranged weapons with a ton of different arrow types for you to choose from. And overall for me, one of the things that made me like Enshrouded so much was it had the depth you wanted without it being too hardcore. Like yeah, you could die in this game and you'll drop your items, but you could just go back after the fact to get them. This game features fast traveling around, so you don't have to spend the entire time walking, but at the same time, if you do want more of a challenge, you can engage in things like boss fights or even go to a higher tier area, and if you're careless, you can die very quickly in combat. It's one of those games where even with just a little bit of preparation, you'll be significantly more powerful, but at the same time, you can play this in a much more lax style, focusing more on building up your own base. And to me, this really does have all of the criteria for that perfect survival game, and one of the best parts is Enshrouded is only $30 right now. This game just released last month. It has an incredibly active online community, both in terms of content generation, but then also just in terms of playing with other players. So stop waiting and use my link down below to pick up Enshrouded for yourself, because believe me, I think you're going to have a pretty good time with this one.